So now let's talk about how to generate motion from scratch in the SFM. All motion editing and animation that you do inside the SFM is based on the idea of what, when, how. What object or controls do you have selected? What time do you have selected? And how are you manipulating it? As you might recall from the earlier tutorial, selection has two components, control selection and time selection. So in this tutorial, we'll go ahead and talk about how to create custom time selections. So for our example, let's go ahead and animate the camera field of view. Maybe do a zoom out shot on the pyro. Select your shot, hit plus, create animation set for existing element, and choose the active camera for the shot. This time, instead of selecting the camera in the animation set editor, we're going to select a single slider control instead. Go ahead and hit the little plus button next to the camera, and you'll see a group that says all, and hit plus on that. And now you can see that all the controls for the camera are listed. So now we're going to go ahead and select just a single control. Click on Field of View, and you'll see that only one slider has become active in the slider bank. Now all the manipulations and time selections are just being applied to this one control. So just as before, hit the Tab key to enter into the motion editor so we can select some time and manipulate the slider. So since we know we want the camera to pull back from the pyro, let's go ahead and set the starting zoom for the camera. By default, we already have all times selected, so go ahead and drag the slider until you're zoomed all the way in. You'll see that the time selection turns orange, indicating that we have a manipulation present, and go ahead and hit the Enter key to apply this motion. Note that if we were to adjust the time selection before we hit the Enter key, we can create an animated transition. So let's go ahead and do that. Create our zoom out by dragging the field of view slider back to a wide angle lens. Notice that just as before, the time selection turns orange. This is because the time selection now contains a manipulation. We call this a floating modification layer. This is what makes it possible for us to adjust time after we've done a manipulation. It does this by keeping the modification layer floating over the existing motion until we're ready to bake it. So this time, let's adjust the time selection before we hit the Enter key. You may have noticed that there are two vertical zigzag edges on the right and left-hand side of the timeline. These are called the infinite time selection handles. If they're present, either all of time before or all of time after is currently selected. So to trim our time selection, all we have to do is click and drag on the infinite time selection handles, and that will detach them from the edge of the window, creating a partial time selection. If you want to reattach them, just drag the time selection back towards the edge of the window, and they'll reattach. You can also hit Ctrl A. If you'd like to move the time selection earlier or later, just click and drag on it and move to the right and left. Because the playhead gets used for a lot of different operations, we tend to use Control Spacebar to review our work. This will play the existing shot once, and then will return the playhead back to its current frame. You'll notice that as the time plays back, when it moves across the edge of the time selection, there's a small hitch in the motion. This is because the time selection is hard. If we want to make a soft time selection, you can go ahead and drag out a fall off by either clicking and dragging near the edges of the time selection or holding down the Shift mouse wheel. Note you can click and drag on these fall off regions to adjust them. And if you want to change the fall-off curve type, you can hit the hotkeys 1, 2, 3, and 4 to change the way that the attack or the decay for the current time selection works. By the way, you can drag on the top or bottom of a soft time selection to move it all at once. To preview animation changes, we recommend holding down the Shift key and waving the mouse to the right and to the left. This is a quick way of reviewing animation without having to constantly readjust the playhead location. This is important because if the playhead is outside of the time selection, when you do the manipulation, you won't see anything happen. The playhead must always be inside the time selection if you want feedback during the manipulation. When you're ready to continue, hitting the Enter key or changing selection either on time or on objects will automatically drop the floating modification layer. You can create a new time selection by holding down the Shift key and waving the mouse to the right and to the left until you find the exact frame that you'd like your time selection to start on. Go ahead and click and drag to the right, and you'll select a region of time. Note that doing this automatically drops the floating modification layer, and the time selection has turned green. Now let's talk about using procedural presets to modify an animation. You can think of these as filters that we apply to the motion through the time selection. You can find all the procedural presets in the upper right-hand corner of the animation set editor. Later we'll go into detail about what each one of them does. Go ahead and shift drag to select some time. And in the animation set editor, look for a preset called Jitter. Drag it to 100%. Notice that as we drag the slider, it jitters the existing motion data. You can see that the jitter updates as we adjust the time selection. Go ahead and hit Enter to apply this to the existing motion. Preview the results by holding down the Shift key and moving the mouse. Okay, so This doesn't look good. Let's talk about how to get rid of it. So if you want to delete all of the motion from an object, hit Ctrl-A to select all of time, drag the playhead till the object is in a state that you like, select the object, and then drag the playhead preset to 100%. Notice that the value at the playhead is being copied into the entire duration of the time selection. This means it's also possible to use this with partial time selections, or that you can incrementally apply the playhead preset to get interesting effects. We'll go over this more as it comes up. I'd go ahead and repeat this a couple times until you let it really sink in. When you're ready to review your work, hit Control Spacebar. To recap, you can create motion using 3 steps. Step 1, select an object or a control. Step 2, modify the slider, use presets, or use a manipulator. Step 3, adjust the time selection. And when you're happy with the results, hit the Enter key or change selection to apply the motion to the underlying object. What, when, how. And don't forget, hit Ctrl-S to save your work.